Hey, if you needed more motivation to have the best DC summer ever, this is it. District Bridges' Summer Bucket List runs June 15th to August 15th across DC. Here's how it works. Earn points and climb District Bridges' leaderboard by supporting local businesses, attending cool events, and crossing things off your summer bucket list. Top players can earn up to $250 in local business gift cards just by visiting pools, exploring museums, and sipping frozen cocktails. It's the ultimate DC staycation. Show some love for the city we call home. Join the Summer Bucket List and celebrate what makes DC truly special. Sign up now and track your progress at districtbridges.org/DC Summer Bucket List.
Today on CityCast DC, with fewer job postings being listed and people eating at home more, DC is on edge money-wise. And it's had us all anxiously awaiting more information about DC's 2026 budget. Now, Mayor Bowser has finally unveiled her proposal. WAMU's Alex Koma is here to tell us what's in it and what's not. Today's Wednesday, May 28th. I'm Bridget Todd, and today we're talking budget. Alex, thanks so much for being here. So I understand the mayor finally dropped her 2026 budget on Tuesday afternoon. Everybody, me included, has been waiting for this, and she presented it to council members with the CFO and her budget director present. Bowser has called this budget Grow DC. Why is she calling it that? Like, is this name accurate?
Well, there's always a little bit of political branding, even in something as technical and nerdy as the budget. So basically, the way that the mayor is trying to frame this is to say, look, I am having to make a lot of cuts. It's going to end up being something like $2 billion across the next 4 years. But she's trying to pitch so many other investments and regulatory changes, crucially, that are aimed at attracting business, replacing the lost federal jobs that we're seeing because of the Trump administration. So she is making a lot of cuts, which certainly doesn't sound like growth, but the idea is that she is going to, try and avoid having to do something similarly painful in the future by doing things like repealing Initiative 82, which ensured minimum wage increases for tipped workers, by building a new football stadium at RFK, which she envisions, sprucing up development in that part of town. All these sorts of things that are not strictly related to the painful budget cuts that she's making, but rather saying, look, I want to try and build something for the businesses here in the future.
Is this framing a direct response to the sort of DOGE impact and the way that it's influenced DC's local economy?
Yes, the phrase the mayor loves using is DOGE economy that we are all now experiencing. DC is projected to lose something like 40,000 jobs over the next 3 years. That's inclusive of federal workers themselves, of course, but also, all the people that are affected by the federal layoffs, whether that be something directly impacted, like federal government contractors, which are, of course, a huge part of what DC makes its bread and butter, but also all the people in the associated businesses, serving federal workers who aren't here anymore, increasingly. So, that's going to lead to something like $1 billion in lost revenue over the next 3 years. There is a clear line between what DOGE is doing and where we find ourselves now with the DC budget.
I want to drill down to some of these specific spending buckets. I did read that Bowser wants to increase investment in MPD. What does that look like exactly?
Yeah, I think that the things to keep in mind is that there are some parts of the budget that just never really get touched because of the political valence to them. So for MPD, the mayor has long had a commitment to increasing the size of the police force. There's some back and forth about whether or not that needs to happen, but her goal is to continue seeing cops get hired and, crucially, cops not get fired. You will remember that there were some talk about will there need to be furloughs or layoffs of city workers to account for, the things that Congress did to DC's budget, i.e. forcing it to cut hundreds of millions in dollars, middle of the year at the last minute. The mayor has avoided any furloughs or layoffs, including, crucially, at the police department, that she's still going to be able to pay out a lot of police overtime, which was a huge concern. And yes, to make some small adjustments upwards of the police budget. This is natural. This happens every year. There's at least some increase for MPD, even as other agencies see big cuts.
One of the things that we've covered a lot on this show is the ways that the Bowser administration has been very vocal about wanting to make DC an easier place for businesses to open, especially in light of Trump shrinking the federal government, which we know is DC's main industry, so significantly. How do you think this budget really gets at that goal?
Yeah, so she is, aiming at a few different areas. Probably the main one is development, which has been a big focus of her over the course of her terms as mayor. She is not only trying to, usher in faster development by cutting back tenant protections. This has been something that she has been working on, changes to the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, which gives you a chance to buy your building if the owner of it tries to sell it. Developers don't like this because it tends to slow down the process of selling a building or buying one if you intend to redevelop it. She wants to change this as well as roll back environmental commitments. She just a few years ago signed some of the most ambitious clean energy laws in the country, including these building energy performance standards that would dictate, how much carbon emissions new construction can use, with the goal of getting to net zero. And she is essentially pausing all of those requirements because, she's saying, oh, this is scaring away developers. They don't want to do business in the city. These are things that she's been proposing for years in some cases. And, there wasn't necessarily the urgency behind them to help her overcome political opposition to them because there, wasn't Elon Musk running around the White House firing a bunch of federal workers. I think it's an open question whether some of this stuff does indeed move ahead because the council doesn't sound super receptive to a lot of it. I mean, they recognize that the situation is dire, but that doesn't mean that they agree that this is the surest way to attract business back to the city when many of them observe we've had a ton of development, even though all of these laws have been on the books for some time.
I don't know about you, but this summer I am looking to travel figuratively as much as possible. Save some money and hassle, but still have fun, enriching cultural experiences without leaving the district. That's why I am so excited about Mosaic Theater's production of Andy Warhol in Iran, a fictionalized account of Andy Warhol's real-life trip to Iran. This play is more timely than ever, raising striking questions about art, celebrity, and revolution. Andy Warhol in Iran runs at Mosaic Theater May 29th to June 29th at the Atlas Performing Arts Center. Get your tickets now at mosaictheater.org. Hey folks, every summer it's hard to decide what kind of vacation do you want to take. Do you want a relaxing natural getaway or do you want a new cultural artistic experience? Luckily this summer you don't have to choose. The Williamstown Theater Festival runs July 17th to August 3rd among the beautiful Berkshire Mountains in northwestern Massachusetts. It brings over 130 artists to the stage for nearly 100 performances. Discounted hotel rooms are available now. Go to WTFestival.org and immerse yourself in theater this summer. That's WTFestival.org.
I'm curious, what's your sense of the council's temperature read on this? Are most folks sort of skeptical of what she's saying, that these kinds of policies are making it harder for folks to open businesses in DC and to have development in DC?
Yeah, I think many on the council have long pushed back against these efforts to, I would say broadly, deregulate the city's economy. The question is, whether or not those concerns are going to be enough to convince them to actually, do something about it in this year's budget. As ever, the problem with the relationship between the mayor and the council and the budget is that the mayor proposes 20 $3 billion or so worth of spending, and then the council's got to find ways to make changes around the margins. That gets harder and harder to do when various budget items are based on different assumptions, and they have to make really painful cuts if they want to, restore some of the programs that she slashed. That's not to say that they're going to roll over on all these issues. Perhaps the biggest one is the repeal of Initiative 82, which doesn't really have an impact on the budget, but it's a very common tactic for mayors to slip in, a policy change in legislation supporting the budget. It's pretty easy for the council to turn around and say, no, we want to take that right out. I've talked to a majority of council members who don't support that. It would not surprise me one bit to see that come out. Will these other regulatory changes survive? I mean, I think that is much murkier, especially because I think there is some real appetite among the council members to do something to make it easier for developers to operate in the city, particularly of affordable housing, because many people in that space are saying that they're facing a crisis at this moment between the federal uncertainty and a lack of rents getting paid by particularly tenants who are on the lower end of the income spectrum. They're saying we can't continue to operate with these changes. I don't know if they'll all be exactly as Bowser has envisioned them, but it would not surprise me to see many of them pass in some form.
Well, speaking of developments to the city, I mean, we have to talk about stadiums. We know that the mayor has an incentive to get this budget approved by July because of stadiums. We now have some real hard numbers here. What are those numbers looking like?
Yeah, so this is sort of formalizing all of the things that we've been hearing about for weeks now. This is, seeing a lot of the spending that the city has promised for the commanders to get them over to RFK. We're still sorting through the details, but the basics look like, $500 million over the next 4 years or so to pay for infrastructure work on the RFK campus itself in order to allow the construction to move ahead. There's an additional $200 million for work that needs to be done on the site, as city officials put it, regardless of whether there will be a stadium there, but just the very basics, the pipes, the roads, the things that, no matter what kind of development would go there, would need to be there, because right now it's just a lot of parking lots, some fields, and a ginormous stadium next to the river. So there's a lot of spending in here. There will be even more moving forward because the city is essentially putting all this on its credit card. And as any of us, with credit card debt has experienced, there's interest to be paid. And so that, it works the same way here. So the city has a very substantial commitment here that would probably be in the excess of $1 billion, by some estimates, much more, especially when you take into account the value of the land the city is giving up to let the commanders build this.
Well, there's also money for Capital One Arena, and a lot of that investment is going to, revitalizing the Chinatown area that the arena is in. How much money is going to that, and what is that neighborhood supposed to look like after all is said and done?
Yeah, we've sort of been, around with the Capitol Arena improvements for a while now. But, now we're really starting to see the rubber hit the road in terms of their designs are getting finished and they are ready to start. In fact, they're doing some of this work already. So anyone in that area is going to see a tremendous amount, not only to the arena itself, but crucially, the mayor has been making promises for a redevelopment of the area around Gallery Place. They've envisioned changes to both 7th Street and 8th Street around the stadium with the goal of bringing that area back, perhaps eventually attracting additional businesses that have ties to its roots as DC's Chinatown. The deputy mayor for planning and economic development has been particularly keen on getting a new Asian grocery store there of some kind. And so there is money in the budget to continue redoing the landscape of that area to make it feel, I think, a little more pedestrian friendly. I mean, if you've been through 7th Street, it is just a sea of cars at all times. That's challenging, not only on police on game, for police on game days, but, even moving forward, if you're trying to get people to, live and work and play in this area. So the mayor is committing not only to, all of the things that we've talked about already to keep the Wizards and Capitals in DC, but also to overhaul the neighborhood as a whole.
So I understand this proposal ups spending on maintenance and wages at DC schools and continuum of care for homeless services, and also calls for modernizing 6 DC libraries. I kind of get the sense that there's a lot of sort of money for this group or fewer taxes for that group. Where is all this money coming from? Are there going to be major cuts to some departments or services?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the mayor has once again been able to avoid some of the worst cuts. She's not laying anyone off. She's not furloughing anyone, nor has she chosen to raise taxes. In fact, in a few key ways, she's shrank taxes, particularly on businesses for the paid family leave program. But the flip side of that is that cuts come to human services spending, which is some of the city's largest spending buckets. So think about money meant to help the lowest income residents. In particular, that's going to mean huge changes to eligibility requirements for Medicaid. The early estimates suggest that something like 25,000 people will no longer have Medicaid coverage, which is going to save the city a lot of money. Those people may be able to get health coverage through other means, but that is not a guarantee. Whereas Medicaid is an entitlement program that doesn't require you to be really paying all that much into it. So this is a very substantial change, as is some of these cuts to food stamp benefits. Again, the city is basically arguing that these costs are rising out of control, so they're choosing, to restrict who is eligible for them in order to save more money on them. And then there are just big capital projects, big construction projects that the city is either pushing off farther into the future or doing away with entirely. Probably the biggest one is spending on the new DC jail. The city has known for decades at this point that it needs to replace the jail, but who wants to spend money on a big structure to lock people up? That's not a politically palatable move. So the city says that it is now going to pursue a private partner to do that, a company that would assume a lot of the debt as the city builds the jail before DC takes over operating it itself. The city expects this will save it hundreds of millions of dollars, but of course that's going to be a controversial arrangement to say the least.
So, Alex, you were actually there when the mayor was unveiling this budget. I have to ask, what were the vibes like?
Well, the vibes at the budget presentations are always kind of the same because the mayor invites the council, sure, but also all of her agency heads and supporters who are there to tell you how great the budget is. So even though this is a budget that is full of some very challenging items, $2 billion in cuts are nothing to sneeze at, there were lots of people there, particularly from the business community, who were very excited about all of these things. I spoke with the DC Chamber of Commerce, who's over the moon about many of these, changes. Many of them they've been lobbying for some time. The head of the Restaurant Association was there. They have hated the increases to the tip minimum wage, and they brought along several tipped workers to drive home the point that they're excited to see it end, arguing that it is forcing restaurants to close. So the vibe was strong at MLK Library downtown. The question is whether it will remain so when this budget goes into the hands of the council starting later this week.
I was going to say business leaders were excited about rolling back regulation. Color me shocked.
Yeah, try and contain your surprise.
Were there contentious moments?
Yeah, probably the most contentious moment, actually kind of similar to our last few budgets, has come from at-large council member Robert White challenging the mayor on some of these cuts, particularly to cuts to the safety net. His argument was that the city tried a lot of this stuff 30 years ago when it was recovering from its last big, budget crisis. And while a lot of these changes did put the city on sound financial footing, his argument was that they, also pushed out a lot of families like his, who no longer had the ability to afford to stay in DC. And so there's some politics behind this, as there is, for just about everything. Listeners will remember that he ran against Mayor Bowser 3 years ago for mayor and lost. And I've reported recently that he is planning to do so again next year. So a little grandstanding, yes, but it also points to what is likely the big point of contention with the council in this budget, which is they recognize they probably will need to cut some of these, human services, but they also know that that's going to be really unpleasant and really tough for a lot of people who can least afford to lose services right now. So expect to see more of that.
Did we get any protest from locals on these issues?
Yeah, we had some progressive groups and unions protesting outside. Many of them are particularly concerned about the I-82 changes. We had several groups who represent restaurant workers there. And, that is going to be, it's been a huge focus. I mean, anybody who has been in DC politics the last few years remembers this passed as a ballot initiative back in 2018. The council overturned it. It passed again in 2022 by an even wider margin. The council committed to not overturning it. I spoke with many members who said they would not touch this. And so it was, for many in this community, a betrayal when the mayor came back and said, listen, we just have to repeal this, despite what voters have said to us, not once, but twice. And so even though, as I said, I think it's unlikely lawmakers go along, it's probably not shocking that it was getting some people out in the streets.
We did an entire episode in early May all about this initiative and the move to roll it back. So if folks want to learn more, definitely check it out. How long will the council and the mayor argue about this budget and tweak this budget?
Yeah, so the council now has 70 days to take care of all this, so a little more than 2 months. This is, of course, as you alluded to at the top, very unusual. We should have been halfway through this process already, in fact. But because of interference from Congress affecting the 2025 budget and some, of the size of the cuts that the mayors had to make, that has, delayed all of this until here in late May. So at this point, the council expects it will finish its work sometime in early August, mid-August. That's bad news for them. They normally go on a 1 month long recess around that time and use that time to prepare legislation for the fall. So they don't really want it to drag on this long, but the budget is so huge that the reality is it's going to take at least those 2 months to get through it all. And there's the real question, as you mentioned earlier, that the commanders want this deal done by July 15th. They've put that in the documents with the city and said, hey, we'll go back and we'll start talking to Maryland if you don't have a deal by then. And the DC Council has said, that's probably impossible. And there's been some talk among members about finding a way to push off any consideration of a stadium beyond the budget deliberations, because there's so many complexities, to say nothing of a multi-billion-dollar stadium deal. Who knows? I mean, that would probably be received pretty poorly by the commanders, not to mention Mayor Bowser. But it's going to be a feature of our next few months of budget talk here.
Well, during those months, are there any tweaks or changes that we can expect?
Yeah, I think that every year the council finds a way to undo some of the mayor's biggest cuts to things like assistance for tenants, to energy efficiency programs. This was a huge fight last year in particular, that the council was able to reverse some of the changes that the mayor made to green energy programs. She basically just proposed doing all the same things again, so it wouldn't surprise me to see the council try and find a way to undo it. They normally find more money for housing vouchers, which helps people struggling for, to pay rent. Wouldn't surprise me again to see them find a way to do that, because frankly, the council hasn't been afraid in the past to raise taxes when times have been bad to fund these services. The mayor has warned them over and over again that she doesn't want to do that. In the previous years, they have anyway. So it wouldn't surprise me to see that at all.
Well, what is next? Is there a date that we should all be keeping an eye out for?
Yeah, the big date at the moment is going to be the end of July into the first week of August. We still don't know when the final vote on the budget will be. We expect that it will be either the first or second week of August. But it's sort of underscoring how unusual this process is we don't actually have one just yet. Hopefully the council finds out sooner rather than later, so I know when I can take my summer vacation.
Well, Alex, thank you so much for being here and keeping us up to date on all of this.
It's always my pleasure.
That's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, and leave us a review. We'll be back tomorrow morning with even more news from around the city. Talk to you then.